can wear an Easter lily for the men who fought and died. You can wear an Easter lily for the women by their side. You can wear an Easter lily for the heroes of 16 who gave us back our dignity and pride and self-esteem. You can wear an Easter lily for the women of the fight, Webley Willie and Liz Farrell and the Countess tall and bright. You can wear an Easter lily for the patriots of the past, although they failed, the inspiration left by them would last. You can wear an Easter lily for the men who fought and died. You can wear an Easter lily for the women by their side. You can wear an Easter lily for the heroes of 16 who gave us back our dignity and pride and self-esteem. You can wear an Easter lily to rekindle Fenian faith and remember our great heroes of the year of 98. You can wear an Easter lily for the Fenian men so brave who died upon the scaffold for the countrymen to save. You can wear an Easter lily for the men who signed their name, for that mighty proclamation ended England's rule of shame. Oric, Pierce, James, Conley, Thomas, Clark and Eamon Kent, MacDermot and MacDonagh, it's from God that they were sent. You can wear an Easter lily for the men who fought and died. You can wear an Easter lily for the women by their side. You can wear an Easter lily for the heroes of 16 who gave us back our dignity and pride and self-esteem. You can wear an Easter lily for the freeboards that have flown, Francis Hughes, Buddy Sands and Sean South and Gary Owen. You can wear an Easter lily for the volunteers with pride, for Ned Daly and O'Halloran, John Houston and McBride. You can wear an Easter lily for the heroes of our time, Thomas Ashe, Michael Gunn and Mike Sweeney and Devine. You can wear an Easter lily for the future of our land, to see it reunited free from England's silent hand. You can wear an Easter lily for the men who fought and died. You can wear an Easter lily for the women by their side. You can wear an Easter lily for the heroes of 16 who gave us back our dignity and pride and self-esteem. You can wear an Easter lily for the saintly hordes who died in the years of great hunger, Trevelyan genocide. You can wear an Easter lily for the children starving tears and the mothers who watched helplessly in action by their peers. You can wear an Easter lily for the scaffold and the jails, and folks who fled in terror and in desperation sailed. You can wear an Easter lily for the exiles that have flown, and let them know that Ireland will always be their home. You can wear an Easter lily for the men who fought and died. You can wear an Easter lily for the women by their side. You can wear an Easter lily for the heroes of 16 who gave us back our dignity and pride and self-esteem. You can wear an Easter lily for the men who fought and died. You can wear an Easter lily for the women by their side. You can wear an Easter lily for the heroes of 16 who gave us back our dignity and pride and self-esteem.
Hi there, this is Green Room John Coleman here. Momentarily, we're going to enjoy the April 6th, 2026 edition of Apoc on Air, broadcast live on Revolution Radio at 10 a.m. Eastern every Monday. The link for that is down below. But a few insights and directions. So the song we just heard for the bumper was Easter Lily by Derek Warfield and the Young Wolf Tones. And I encourage you to check out his work. It celebrates the 1916 Rising, which I'll speak about shortly. In the moments to come, you're going to see me holding up a telephone and using it as a microphone. And that's because I am doing both of those things. We have found, after a month and a half of broadcast on Revolution Radio, that Discord does not cooperate with my humble Chromebook very well. and had terrible audio problems early on. And we found another way to access Revolution Radio and to broadcast through another application. And so that is through the telephone. That's a much better connection. So when it looks like I'm using this machine as a microphone, so I am. And now you know, and please enjoy the show. Hello, everyone. I'm John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute, an institute for the humanities and alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. You are listening to Apoc on Air, broadcast from Revolution Radio every Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. So happy for you to join us. Please remember that Revolution Radio is listener supported, so if you have the means to do so, please do so. And without further ado, we'll get settled down. I hope you have a cup of coffee or tea or some non-alcoholic beverage ready at hand as we get into this day's material. So here we are on the 6th of April, 2026, and I'm reminded that today is the 110th anniversary of the Easter Rising of 1916. And we love history on this show. In fact, the purpose of Apoc on Air is to marry the humanities with current events. And part of that, and a very convenient way to do that, is with anniversaries. And so in 1916, if you're unfamiliar, there was a rising of Irish Republicans, nationalists, and leftists, and they merged in a type of alliance of convenience, which those of you who know about South American history will be able to see some similarities. You know, the association of super religious Catholics and left-wing people and ideologies you wouldn't normally think would get along. Sometimes in a baptism of fire, such as 1916, found themselves working together. And so you have this uprising. Of course, Britain was very, very much occupied elsewhere on the continent, as well as in the Middle East in the First World War. And as the Irish said, England's tribulation is Ireland's advantage, or something to that effect. And so they took the opportunity whilst England was occupied elsewhere to rise up. And the rising was put down. You should see the symbolism of Easter, Easter week, and all of the religious mythology there too, playing a role in the timing of the 1916 rising. But it's a tremendous example of art imitating life and life imitating art, both the event itself and how it goes on to be canonized in poetry and street balladry, which we're going to enjoy some momentarily. And also the larger Irish cultural revival preceding the First World War. Art imitating life, life imitating art. You can only sing so many patriotic songs and read so many patriotic poems before you have to do something with it. All right. So every week we have a song or a poem here on Apoc on Air, appropriate to something in terms of anniversaries or what we're looking at in our project study. I'm going to recap what that is, because you're part of that. You are part every week on this show who are joining in. You are part of this project, this humanities curricula that we've developed at the college. Maybe you're really moved and inspired to dive deeper, and in which case we hope to have you enrolled. But in the meantime, with your cup of coffee every week, you're just as much one of our students here on Revolution Radio. So there's many ways you can apply yourself to this lifelong learning course that we offer. Before we get into that, who fears to speak of Easter week? This is our selection for the week. And just like last week, you got a song on your hands. They're not always songs, incidentally. Who fears to speak of Easter week? Who blushes at the name? When the cowards mock the patriot's fate, who hangs his head in shame? He's all a knave or half a slave who slights his country down. But true men like you, men will fill your glass without. Some on the shore of distant lands their weary hearts have lain, and by the strangers' heedless hands their lonely graves were made. But though their clay be far away beyond the Atlantical foam, in true men like you, men, their spirits still at home. The dust of some is Irish earth, among their own they rest, and the same land that gave them birth has caught them to a breast. And we will pray that from their clay full many a race may start of true men like you, men to act as brave a part. They rose in dark and evil days to right their native land. They kindled here a living blaze that nothing shall withstand. Alas, that might can vanquish right, they fell and passed away. But true men like you, men are plenty here today. To autumn domine miserere nobis. Thus is Who Fears to Speak of Easter Week. That's the Maria Giddens version. There's other versions. Brendan Behan is probably the one who popularized that song and wrote his own most notable lyrics in his time. Who Fears to Speak of Easter Week. All right, there's our poetry section. And now just a recap before we get into our news-ish section for this week. I found an interesting thing, not quite ripped from the headlines, but nonetheless appropriate to our time together every week, from Ted Gioia on Substack. But most appropriate preparation is a reminder that the project is this regular study. Right now it's organized over a year. When all is said and done, it will actually be over a 3-year cycle, where year by year by year we study all of human history, synchronizing history and philosophy and art over the course of those 365 days. And you can freely download the 5 present volumes of the project from ApocatastasisInstitute.wordpress.com/the-project. And we hope you may join with us. The first volume is a collection of 3,000 pages of poetry, which we just nibble away at again and again and again throughout the year. And then the subsequent 4 volumes are organized by the seasons. Now, last week we concluded volume 3. And therefore, we concluded our reading of H.G. Wells's Outline of History. Volume 4 is something of a break from typical chronology. And we spend the spring semester superficially looking at a critique, or critiques plural, of H.G. Wells and his view of history. And they come from 2 contemporary authors of the man. And those are Hilaire Belloc and G.K. Chesterton. And the purpose of these corrections to Wells is indeed to remember that no single book and no single author, however capable, has all the answers. And Wells himself is not sacrosanct. There are some definite drawbacks to the outline of history, something I think he was very well aware of. And I think any meta-historian with any sort of humility knows this. You go back to Ibn Khaldun in the 13th century. He's pointing this out with his Muqaddimah, right? The shortcomings. In fact, a fair amount of the introduction of the Muqaddimah is given to laying out the author's shortcomings. But nevertheless, our shortcomings shouldn't prohibit us from valiant and titanic works. as Newman said from Britain, 1,000 difficulties never equal one doubt. Well, that's true in the religious life, but that's also true in the academic life. Our shortcomings should not daunt us. So anyhow, this spring, every year, we get into the critique of Wells, and also the opportunity, as I'll be laying out, is to look at a more artistical, or I dare say spiritual, angle to history. Wells was a socialist and a materialist. And that has its own valuable insights, but I would argue, there are drawbacks to that as well. So there we go with the outline. There again, you can download the volumes. We're getting into volume 4. And we'll indeed jump right into that critique once we get to our main entree this week, and that's looking at Hilaire Belloc and his critique. In fact, he wrote a whole little book, about 120 pages, on this. Okay, so our news segment, so to speak, a little bit different this week. We're not just pulling it from the papers, although I will absolutely be diving into Melania Trump and the education robot with Brigitte Macron at the White House lately. Rather bizarre stunt, I thought, and yet rather indicative of where we are at as a culture, who is redefined education simply to have a utilitarian job application. Well, guess what? Now the robots are coming for that, and we'll look at this event. It won't be the last of such stunts, I believe. But for this week, we have from the Substack, The Honest Broker, by Mr. Ted Gioia, that's Gioia, the article, How to Read the Great Books in 52 Weeks, a conversation on how my humanities reading program went. So this gentleman, presumably coming from a finance background, given the honest broker moniker, he subsequently has become a man of leisure. I'm this year with the college dabbling in finances, and for the moment, this morning, they're doing okay. It was a pretty rough couple of weeks, I'll tell you. It's all brand new to me, but I'm told that if you hit you hang out and you hit the finance long enough, you can eventually retire and become a man of leisure. I don't know if I'm looking to do that, but I do need to have a more mature understanding of financing the school, and hence my interest. But anyway, this guy has a lot of cultural stuff on his Substack. And sounds like he's been doing what we've been doing here at ApocatastasInstitute, coming up with a type of regular cyclical curricula. And we read now. A few weeks ago, reader Cheryl Drewy reached out to me. She had been inspired by my 52-week humanities program. Not only had she completed the course, but documented her progress on a podcast. And if you look at the article, again, How to Read the Great Books in 52 Weeks by Ted Gioia, you can see an image of herself, and she's sitting down on the living room floor, and she's just walled up and bricked away by her books, and looking none the worse for wear. So Cheryl had now questions for me, and the author, Ted Gioia, agreed to do this Q&A, of which we'll nibble away. So she asked, what led you to create the 52-week humanities reading program? Many people want this kind of immersive education in the humanities, maybe even more so nowadays, given the mind-numbing impact of apps and social media on our lives. People feel victimized by tech and mass media. They want to learn how to think more deeply, not just via sound bites and scrolling videos. Not everyone, I'm interjecting, is brain rotting. Not everyone is hungry for brain rot. You can give me all the damn shorts you want on your Facebooks and your YouTubes. You can condition people all you want. People crave depth. They crave depth. The human being, what makes him the human being, more than anything else, as we've spoken about, is his faculty of reason. You can jack with your digestive system with liquor and sugar, and it feels good. Shorts on YouTube feel good. Sound bites feel good. But you know that sugar is not nutritious. Your body knows that and craves something substantive. And likewise, you and I know that these shorts and all of this brain rot is not substantive. There is a hunger there, and you bet your bippy that this hunger will be growing. He continues, the people who want more substance in learning, they're on the right track, but they don't know where to start. And even if they find some entry point, the task feels overwhelming. There are so many books, so many agendas, and it's estimated here in these United States that every year 1 million new books are published. Now, I dare say most of those million are not worth reading and will not be read the subsequent year and will be soon forgotten. But even amongst the great books, there's a bewildering amount, a embarrassment of riches, as we said a few years ago so often. So Ted Gioia sets himself a challenge. He says, I would design a complete survey of arts and culture in just 52 weeks, and I wouldn't limit myself to Western culture. I tried to cover the entire world. And this is something you saw a lot in the last century, in the 19th century, is trying to encapsulate an entire discipline in a collection of books. This is, in fact, the whole concept of the encyclopédie. Going back to Denis Diderot, the idea that you could, in fact, encompass all of human knowledge, at least in a scaffolded and matrixed manner, in the Encyclopédie. And that continued, right? You would have these single collections of biology or chemistry or religion, and this idea that you could now maybe I think language theory and maybe humility has taken some of the piss out of that idea, but it's a worthy idea. I mean, it's an absolutely worthy idea. If you just realize that no text, no book is going to have everything perfect, then once you have your goals realistic and your appraisal realistic, then you can pursue it. I think if I can interject here some more, that's what you're seeing in the history discipline a lot is when it comes to questioning chronology. Some of you here on Revolution Radio are familiar with that, and people like Fomenko, the Russian historian, Soviet era historian. People have they come out of these modern schools, and I would include even some of this alternative so-called education, with a very superficial grasp of various disciplines, including history, and they putter along till they're 30 or 40 with this, and it doesn't seem to affect their lives. And then they come across some juicy conspiracy site, maybe My Lunch Break or something like that, and all of a sudden they realize that their rather shallow understanding of history, which was also presented as very cut and dry and pat and official, is incomplete. And I think what happens is people, they tend to overreact. I very much will give over another episode completely to this topic because it's worthy, and I think it's very interesting to the sorts of people who listen to Revolution Radio and who have a brain on their shoulders or brain in their head between their shoulders. And we're aware of revisionist history and certainly lies in history and cover-ups and things, but what's happening is I would suggest maybe too much of an overcorrection. That's what you're seeing, where, I mean, you have people out there that believe the world is 100 years old, which seems fantastic and incredible in the senses of those words, meaning no one can take it seriously. Which, again, it's not either or. This is the reason I'm doing this show here, in fact, is to add a certain nuance where you can have a generally reliable chronology and account of the past, and a maturity that understands, well, maybe things have been left out. Mud floods. Yeah, I'm open to mud floods. I'm open to the fact that the Smithsonian has covered up things. I'm open to the fact that agendas have manipulated it. I'm totally open to all that. I'm the most, I don't know, how do you say, not in a political sense, but I'm the most conservative radical you've ever heard of. And so I don't I don't see a contradiction between having a shared narrative of history that we can take as relatively reliable, and the fact that there's hanky-panky in the transmission, and that we ought not overcorrect and come to the conclusion that all of history is made up. In fact, I shudder and I cringe when I think of this, but I actually had a conversation with a homeschooling mother a couple of years ago, where certain unreliable aspects of history at least were alluded to, and then the lady just cut to the chase and said, uh, because of this unreliability of history, I don't teach my child any history. Don't do that. Don't do that. It's conclusions like that is why I'm doing this show on Revolution Radio, and why I'm doing this work here in Connecticut. We can have the via media. In fact, that's what Aristotle says is necessary for the virtuous life, is to not be one of extremes. Anyhow, Ted Gioia continues. This 52-week program sounded crazy. Was it even possible? I'd find out. But first, I added to the challenge. I would limit the required reading to 250 pages per week. That's a demanding workload, but not impossible. And I would also add music recommendations with the same global approach. There would be a playlist for each week. I'd also suggest online art galleries so that the program would encompass visual art too. Skipping ahead some. I was lucky that I had some relevant experiences, not just in my own education, but also in teaching. As an undergraduate at Stanford, I had tutored freshmen in the university's Great Books program. Again, this is a very 20th century idea, and that had different applications. Wells's Outline of History is one such example. The Durant's Story of Civilization is another. The book, the century is littered with historians doing meta history. I'm diving into one such actually from 2007. Is it Catastrophe? No, I forget the title. I'll have to look it up. But Martin Guibert, Lord of Mercy on him. He came up with extensive multi-volume, universal history of the 20th century. And so it's there, and one of the most famous ones was, in terms of literature, put out by the University of Chicago, and that's the Great Books program. Mortimer Adler, I know, was involved with that. A worthy thing. And then people say, I think it was alluded to it in this paragraph, oh well, it's too much on the Western canon, or the canon's stale. Well, maybe, but again, this is the inability. I think I've brought up this human trend, maybe a very American trend, to have no sense of moderation. So, okay, the Great Books program put out by the University of Chicago had drawbacks. Therefore, we're just going to scrap the idea altogether and just monkey branch from random book to random book. You should, all of you on this Revolution Radio broadcast, go and look up a text. I believe it is also by Mortimer Adler, entitled How to Read a Book. How to Read a Book. And he speaks about symphonic reading. So the few of us that still make reading part of our routine every day, most of us just randomly choose books. Once we finish one book, we just choose the next one that strikes our fancy. Adler encourages us throughout that text, How to Read a Book, to a greater maturity and discipline in our reading. And one of those is symphonic reading, where you read 10 or 20 books on a topic before moving on to a new topic. And you'll see how that is very rewarding altogether. So Cheryl, the interlocutor with Ted Gioia here on this Substack article, asks, what's been the feedback from your list in particular? I know you've created a few different reading lists. You first got my attention when you shared the list about living with technology, but this was the biggest reading list of them all. And Gioia says, I didn't know what to expect when I published the first installment. As it turned out, the response was overwhelmingly enthusiastic. I also knew many obstacles there were to this kind of learning. When I was a teen, I encountered a smug response to my own efforts to read the great books. I was told that this kind of education was not relevant for someone like me, a working class kid from an Italian Mexican household with parents who had never gone to college. I thought, and Mr. Coleman here agrees, that was patronizing in the extreme. For me, reading Plato, Shakespeare, Dante was tremendously liberating. The people who tried to prevent me from getting this education were, in my opinion, the narrow-minded ones. Yes, you can even see by the mid to late 20th century that this materialism was deeply penetrating the culture, so that even a child who would try to educate themselves would actually have the fire. And I think this is very normal for young men in particular to pursue this. You can see him getting shot down. If you go back to the late 19th century, early 20th century, very different. The idea that the life of the mind was something only for the so-called white collar is a very new idea. Maybe it's a very, very, very old idea, but for a season in between, late 19th century, early 20th century, there was this idea that the life of the mind was for every single person who had enough maturity to apply themselves to that betterment. Hence, to my earlier comments, the whole idea of encyclopedias and the story of civilization and the outline of history and the outline of music and how to read philosophy and art, interpret. I mean, this was a culture around the time of the wars, the Great Wars, and before a little bit, that really valued individual learning and this type of self-direction. And I guess then they invented the radio and the television, not revolution radio, but every pop radio, and people went down the tubes after that. It was painful to limit myself to just 250 pages of reading per week. That meant I often had to pick part of a book because it was too long to read in its entirety. For example, I would love to have the students read all of the Brothers Karamazov. Instead, I had to focus on the most famous part of the novel, you know it, A Grand Inquisitor. Just 30 pages, but it's a mind-blowing 30 pages. I made similar decisions about Proust, Joyce, and other authors. So, all right, there's our kind of humanities news article for the week. This is from Ted Gioia, How to Read the Great Books in 52 Weeks. I really encourage you to check that out because it pretty much encapsulates what we're trying to do with the project here at Apocatastasis. Now, we're moving on to our main segment for the remainder of the hour. And that is looking in volume 4 from the project, which you can freely download from ApocatastasisInstitute.wordpress.com/the-project. You can freely download all these volumes. We're now looking kind of at the more spiritual and humanistic counter look to H.G. Wells. And we're going to look in particular at an essay, short book by Hilaire Belloc, directly critiquing H.G. Wells. And then we'll move later in this quarter, later in this beautiful season, spring, to G.K. Chesterton's rebuttal to Wells in his Everlasting Man. Both of these authors were Roman Catholics at a very interesting literary time for adherents of that religion. And regardless of any of our religious affiliations or non-affiliations here on Revolution Radio, certainly we appreciate the different angle that these Christian writers would have to more secular H.G. Wells. Would like to hear Muslim takes on this and atheist takes on H.G. Wells. And, as time goes on and we develop the project, we'll dive right into that. Okay, so we're looking at Hilaire Belloc. And before we do so, just a reminder here at the bottom of the hour that you're listening to Apoc on Aire. And this is broadcast on Revolution Radio every Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. So good to have you join us. Please remember that Revolution Radio is listener supported. With that being said, Hilaire Belloc, the author we'll be looking at for the next few weeks, was a French-English writer and political activist. Belloc was considered one of the most versatile authors of the 20th century, producing essays on history, politics, and economics, as well as poetry, travelogues, and satire. Again, this is a perfect example of the type of reading culture, popular reading culture. And when I say popular, I mean for the masses, that was obtaining in the last century. His Catholicism had a strong effect on his work. Born in the French Empire in 1870, Belloc became a naturalized British subject in 1902 whilst retaining his French citizenship. Whilst attending Oxford University, he served as president of the Oxford Union. Those are the guys that are always doing the debates, these rather pretentious debates. They have all sorts of big shots speaking out. I'm sure you've seen the clips on YouTube and whatever. From 1906 to 1910, he served as one of the few Catholic members of the British Parliament. Belloc was a noted disputant with a number of feuds. He was also a close friend and collaborator of G.K. Chesterton, also George Bernard Shaw, a very opposite man to Chesterton. And Shaw was a friend and frequent debate opponent of both Belloc and Chesterton, and dubbed the pair the Chester-Belloc. Belloc's writings encompassed religious poetry and comic verse for children. His wildly sold cautionary tales for children included, quote, Jim who ran away from his nurse and was eaten by a lion, and Matilda who told lies and was burned to death. Those are quotes now. He wrote historical biographies, and including a travel work, The Path to Rome. I should say that his cautionary tales for children are not for the faint-hearted. They're very reminiscent of the original fairy tales. If you know about the Brothers Grimm and that whole tradition, actually, I think rather a testimony to, the idea lost altogether in our day that children can take a lot more than we tend to think about nowadays. We tend to think children are far more delicate than they are. Should want to revisit that in another capacity sometime. There was a good article I read, I think from the Atlantic, and it was talking about the whole invention of children's cuisine, and subsequent to that, the whole idea that the child would be picky and that there were children's food. Think about the cursed chicken nugget and fish stick. And they were contrasting the authors, to 19th century diaries where children talk about eating pickled brains and innards and collard greens and all sorts of things. And they were actually making a correlation that, why do you find children eating so vociferously, including a certain amount of alcohol in the 18th and 19th centuries. And then in the 20th century, they become these dilettantes, just picking away at their fish sticks. And actually, the correlation the authors had was lethargy. In the 20th century, children become much more static because of the rise of mass education and suburbia and so forth. All you know this online here. There's all this bogus nostalgia for the 1990s. And we were the last generation that went outside to play, and yet compare whatever truth there was to that, compare that to the activity level of the 1920s or 30s, and you'd go in a hole and die. In the 1990s were hardly active in comparison, and then compare that to the overall 20th century caloric output by children to the 18th and 19th and previous centuries, and the same sort of red cheeks obtain. I mean, we're becoming blobs, I suppose. Which is the point. Which is the point of the archons, I suppose. Well, we're not blobs on this show here. We're hustling. We're getting our reading in. All right. So then there's a section about Belloc's early life, his courtship and marriage, and so forth. But we're going to just go ahead and kind of look at an analysis of his disputes with other authors, and then we're going to indeed get to his critique of the outline of history. So in the 1920s, Belloc he criticized H.G. Wells and the outline of history. Keep in mind that the outline of history comprises volumes 2 and 3 of our project. So if you want the reference there, you can freely download that from our project site. And he was saying that Wells had a secular bias. So Belloc is going to criticize the outline of history, which purports to be this objective look at history. He's going to say that secularism itself is a bias. It's just as biased as any of your formal religions. Belloc also criticized Wells's belief in evolutionary means of natural selection, a theory that Belloc asserted had been completely discredited. Wells remarked that, quote, debating Mr. Belloc is like arguing with a hailstorm, unquote. It's a good analogy. I mean, both Wells and Belloc were men of not just prolific output, but prolific reading, and you can see just these quips. You can only make quips like that. Debating Mr. Belloc is like arguing with a hailstorm. If you're regularly coming across and reading and thinking. Belloc's review of the outline of history observed that Wells's book was powerful and well written, but up until the appearance of man, that is somewhere around page 7. Okay, so that's an underhanded insult, isn't it? Right? Oh, it's a very strong book. It's an excellent book about mankind until you get to the origins of, until men show up on the scene. So about page 7, everything else is garbage. Anyway, Wells responded with another small book, Mr. Belloc Objects. This is what you call a battle of the books. So Wells publishes the outline of history. Belloc publishes the companion, this is the title of the book, the companion to Mr. Wells's outline of history. And then Wells, counter-serve. Wells writes a book back, Mr. Belloc Objects. Not to be outdone, number 4, Belloc followed with Mr. Belloc still objects, saying, this is not a quote. G.E. Colton wrote Mr. Belloc on Medieval History in a 1920 article. After a long simmering feud, Belloc replied with the booklet, The Case of Dr. Colton. Belloc's style during later life fulfilled the nickname he received in childhood, Old Thunder. Belloc's friend, Lord Sheffield, described his provocative personality in a preface entitled The Curse of the Nona. Okay, in just later years, and we'll head over to his look at Wells head-on. In 1937, Belloc was invited to be a visiting professor at Fordham University in New York City by university president Robert Gannon. It's a Jesuit university in New York. They have quite a focus, I understand, on the Eastern rites and Eastern Christianity. Belloc delivered a series of lectures at Fordham, which he completed in May of that year. The experience ended up leaving him physically exhausted, and he considered stopping the lectures early. In 1942, Belloc suffered a stroke and never recovered from its effects. On the 12th of July, 1953, he suffered burns and shock from falling on his fireplace, and he died a few days later on the 16th. He was buried at the Shrine Church of Our Lady of Consolation in St. Francis in West Grinstead, and he goes on here. So, grand. All right, so that's a little bit about Hilaire Belloc, a contemporary of H.G. Wells. And I thought now to get into the introduction to his objection to the outline of history. Whenever we read, we always want, and this is getting back to symphonic reading, we want to have many points of view. Eventually, you don't do it at the beginning. I think this is part of the maturity as readers that we need to develop is, where does this come from? Does it come from our school days? This idea that when we read a book, we need to grasp it all at once becomes very overwhelming. And so when you tell someone with that assumption, and that's a false assumption, incidentally, when you tell someone that, and then you say, and you have to read with a wide variety of views on a topic, it can become quite overwhelming. What you want in your reading, in my reading, in our studies, is the longue durée. just like with exercise, physical exercise, it is regularity. It's better to read a little bit every day than to gorge once in a while, or to become a martinet with your daily reading, so that if you don't get the exact number of minutes in for a day, you roll it over onto the next day, and then it becomes this burden, and then it never gets done. Take nibbles away. The same advice obtains for learning an instrument and studying a language, incidentally. So again, long term. So if you're out of habit in reading, or reading many views on a topic, maybe you flit around, right? Have a long term vision, and also plan out your reading ahead. Have that discipline. Anyway, case in point, Wells' critique, Belloc's critique of Wells. My object, he says in the introduction, in these pages, is to follow Mr. Wells's outline of history, which its author has repeated to state the opposing truths with their supporting evidence and reasoning. If it be asked why I should devote such a labor to the book, which is but a passing fashion, well, I beg to differ. We're studying here at Apocatastastis all this century later, and that not in the classes or districts which count most, I answer that, though ephemeral, the work has had a wide circulation, and is therefore of some momentary effect worth checking, whilst it is also representative of its type. Writing of wide circulation, which repeats as facts for general exception theories once respectable and now exploded. Now, to check erroneous statement is always worthwhile. To check in the sense of to stop or to halt, right? To check the advance of something. Like in chess, right? If it be asked why I envisage a Catholic audience in particular for this book, this rebuttal of Wells, I answer that the issue in such matters lies between the Catholic Church and its modern opponents. The hosts of modern writers in all countries, of whom Mr. Wells is a local example, act more or less consciously in reaction against the Catholic Church. It is her doctrines that they are concerned to attack. And soon, with the increasing effect of the Church upon the one hand, the increasing abandonment outside of her boundaries of all transcendental belief on the other, there will be but two opposite camps: the faith and its enemies. Already the denial of a personal God, of immortality, of the redemption, of the fall, of the incarnation, the resurrection, is no longer directed against some vague Christianity, a word with 20 meanings or none, but against that defined and existing corporation, which alone defends in its entirety that body of dogma upon which our civilization has been founded, and with the loss of which it will perish. The loss of the transcendental here at Apocatastastis is something we're trying to recover. This aspect, I am afraid, is lost on most practitioners of conventional religion, which explains actually a lot of eccentricities of Christianity in these United States. There's no sense of the transcendental, so it just becomes this amalgam of so-called morality and doctrines with no soul to it. I think that would be my encapsulation of American religion: doctrines and morality with no soul. And that's from the people who continue to affiliate. And then, so you have your American Christianities, a soulless thing, and then obviously the secular culture, by definition, has no transcendental understanding of reality. In fact, here in New Milford, they had the Stations of the Cross Good Friday devotion the other day, and I was horrified that people were honking their horn, and because of some slight traffic hiccups, were honking their horn and yelling out of the car, and totally trashy behavior for any social presentation whatsoever, let alone on Good Friday, and let alone obviously towards people in a state of meditation. It was altogether trashy, and that's our day. When you don't have the transcendental in life, whether it comes to your perception of history or just your comportment in public, if you don't have that transcendental, I don't care what religious tradition you glom onto, anything is better than none. And even if you're an atheist, I'm not lumping atheists here. There's something very missing, I would argue, without any perception. Even the atheist has very much to his credit a conviction, a set of beliefs. It is, as Belloc points out, this loss of the transcendental. The atheist believes in right and wrong. The Christian, the Muslim, the Buddhist, they have doctrines. What I'm critiquing, I'm not critiquing atheism, agnosticism, any sort of Christianity, any flavor of Islam or Judaism, but what I bring up here is what Belloc brings up with his point that the West, even 100 years ago, was slipping into this lack of the transcendental, this lack of enchantment. In the case of Wells, without when it came to history, but my larger observations. What I'm critiquing here is this apathy towards things of the soul, towards the numinous of the spiritual. Because even the atheist, the agnostic, has thought about these things. It is the conclusion that these things don't matter enough to think about that I'm going after, and that I mentioned the Station of the Cross stunt with the people honking and getting all in a tizzy over some slight traffic disruption. It is this that comes from a disenchanted world. But I don't care if you're into your Norse paganism or your Roman Catholicism or your whatever, the Shabbat Lubavitch or whatever for the Jews. I don't care if you're a committed agnostic or whatever, but have some compass on the internal world of the spirit. An atheist thinks about the religion, that's good. But I'm not even that concerned about one's conclusions on these things, but that it matters. Anyway, Belloc goes on further. I have the legitimate motive of sustaining others. There are Catholics into whose hands a work of this kind falls, and it is possible that here and there a Catholic may be disturbed in his faith by popular literature of this kind, for the sake of this very small number, whom may suffer from a popular work of this kind, a desire to examine the book and distinguish its merits from its absurdities. Yeah, so Belloc is writing at a very interesting time where Catholics, and I think a lot of more traditional Protestants in the West, were kind of hunkering down into sort of ghetto mentality. So when it came to what used to be called modern unbelief, it was just to ignore things. This is why you had the Roman Catholics with their Index of Forbidden Books. And indeed, confessional colleges of many denominations. The idea that you would screen yourself off from these outside ideas. Well, that didn't work out very good. It's a shame that more contemporary groups haven't learned this dynamic, because what ends up happening is that people who have no interaction with so-called modern unbelief, when they leave those environments, maybe they come from a very sheltered educational background and they come head on into the gale of modernity and its philosophical claims and its transcendental claims, even if it claims there is no transcendental. What ends up happening is often a crisis of faith, often a great crisis of faith. And if the person's intellectually honest and they have no preparation, no immunity, so to speak, from contemporary trends of thought, often they will have to conclude on this skepticism. At the outset, my task behooves me to set forth the great talents with which Mr. H.G. Wells has been endowed by Almighty God, and especially the talents suitable to the writer of general history. I've been calling it meta history. Belloc uses the expression general history. For indeed, he seems from his earlier works admirably fitted for writing a general outline of history, and would, by the consent of all, have been thought apt for the task, had he not undertaken it. Firstly, H.G. Wells writes very clearly. He practices an excellent economy in the use of words. This, for popular exposition, is essential. And he never fails in it. He never lapses into verbosity. He is direct, simple, and clear. Next, Wells possesses a sense of time. Now, in history, nothing is more valuable. With his lights within the measure of his limited instruction, he does see time in right scale. That is so rare in any historian that one cannot welcome it too warmly. And that's interesting. I've been thinking about that. I've been thinking a lot, as you know, on these weekly broadcasts, and if you've followed any of my writing lately, on how television, and by which I mean that in the Marshall McLuhan sense of everything from the telegraph to the iPhone and beyond, telephonia, how this is changing our perception of life. And, Belloc here, he talks about Wells having a sense of time. It occurs to me, we're really losing that concept of time, of history. And one example this very morning, as I was preparing for the day, washing up, I was playing some music, and it occurred to me that we don't have these songs recounting time. I mean, there used to be pop songs, even from the I hate to use the generational language, it's far too divisive, but, baby boomers or Gen X would have songs like The Old Man's Tale or the subsequent Old Woman's Tale. I think Ewan McCall wrote that. Or we know in America much more popularly, We Didn't Start the Fire, I believe, by Billy Joel, or Leningrad, I think, also by Billy Joel. I mean, if you listen to these songs from the last century, these are popular songs in the sense that these were broadcast for a mass audience. There are these generational milestones that are being sung about, which means that the population that was receiving these songs had a similar consciousness of having gone through the Second World War or gone through the Cold War, as the case may be, and that this had some impact on their identity as individuals. And it occurred to me that that sort of song would have no resonance whatsoever. That theme in the song would have no resonance whatsoever on a contemporary audience. We Didn't Start the Fire would not be popular today. It's quite remarkable how the popularity of these things are conditioned, in this instance, by historical consciousness. And just 20 or 30 years ago, this was popular. We've lost that altogether. We have become like animals. We've lost the sense of history. I've said that before in some of my shows with Dr. Fetzer, that there have been things in the past few years which are analogous and ought to have been analogous to, we'll say, the baby boomers or Gen X, well, in particular the baby boomers, like the fall of Kabul should have been, in popular memory, as significant as the fall of Saigon. And yet I can tell you that people have no consciousness of that. They've forgotten about it, if they ever were aware of it to begin with. Whatever happened with Trump's supposed assassination in Butler, Pennsylvania, that should have had a generational impact. Or Charlie Kirk's death, again, whatever happened. And yet it hasn't. Completely forgotten. And there are other examples as well. We've lost the sense of historical consciousness. Everything is collapsing because of telephonia into the present moment. And we contrast that, getting back to the Belloc book here, we contrast that to 100 years ago, where you can see there's a very, very pronounced sense of historical positioning. Where does one fit? And Belloc here in this paragraph complimented Wells on being able to convey this adequately to the popular audience. Next, he goes on, we should remark that Mr. Wells has, as his works of fiction amply show, a strong power of making the image he has framed in his own mind arise in the mind of his reader. This has indeed been his chief talent. It is a talent extremely rare, the very essential good of the imaginative writing, but of the particular importance in historical writing. So I'll make a note here for next week. We're going to wind things down. I know the music's going to start up soon enough. So let's recap our past time together. We began with an observation that this week is the 116th anniversary of the Easter Rising, a strange and delightful coalition of various Irish factions during the First World War, and would go on to have a great deal of resonance thereafter. Interesting question of art imitating life with those political developments coming out of the cultural renewal in Ireland prior to the First World War. Then, on the heels of that, we had the song Who Fears to Speak of Easter Week. And you can look up Brendan Behan's version of that if you're interested. There was a recap made of the project, which this very broadcast here on Revolution Radio every Monday at 10 a.m. Is part of. And I do remind everyone that Revolution Radio is listener supported. I want to take that opportunity. And then we conclude with Ted Gioia and Hilaire Belloc looking at different topics. Well, there's our music, and so our time together is closed up. Please check out ApocatastasisInstitute online, and over and out.